Welcome to the Beat the Banks podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Fuller, and I'm here with the one and only Mr. Steve Chater, and we're going to have a conversation
It's a good thing there's only one of me.
That's right. We're lucky to have you. So, Steve, I wanted to go today into just how we met, how we formed our relationship, and your insights around infinite banking, especially coming from the real estate investing world.
Okay,
So, can I ask you a few questions then?
fire away.
So, one of the things I've always admired about you is just your phenomenal ability to invest in other people and be able to coach and mentor them. And when I first came and saw you speak at a real estate event I was invited to, I immediately knew your mind was very, we'll say, well developed in the financial realm. Not a whole lot of people understand the concepts that you teach financially, and that's in the real estate world. And when I first heard you speak, I knew you knew the exact code to winning the money game. And it was so impactful for me. I brought all my insurance clients the next night because that one was for agents. And then it was from there, hey, if you want your clients to see this real estate conversation, you should bring them. So I brought 5 of my clients because I was like, you've got to hear this guy talk about money, because this is the secret to unlocking the life that they're all trying to live. And it was a very different conversation that you were teaching. I think that most people are getting in the big wide world. So where did that philosophy and that mindset come from for you?
Actually, I got my real estate license in 77, and I had moved here in Arizona. I'd moved here from New York, and I didn't know anybody. And so I was trying to learn everything I could. I was going to community college and taking courses after I got my license. And I was seeing what was happening in the real estate industry. And specifically, we used to have the largest training base. It's called Williams Air Force Base here. And we had people from all over the country come here. They were stationed at the base, and they were keeping their houses when they got moved somewhere else. And I watched them growing and building wealth by keeping their houses, because the value of their houses, now we're talking 1978, 1979, the value of their houses, where they were around $20,000 to buy a house, believe it or not, right? That's lower than the down payment right now. But they were going up $1,000 a month. And I was watching people create equity. So bottom line is, I didn't know anybody out here. So I called my dad, I called my friends back in New York, I called my grandfather, and I said, you can't believe what's happening out here and what people are accomplishing with real estate. So they chose to say, okay, Steve, we'll invest some money and we'll buy some properties. And many of these instructor pilots from the Air Force Base doing the same thing. And I got involved in property management at that point. And so property management is about investing in property is when you acquire one. Property management is how do you manage to the goal? And so since I'm goal-oriented person, I was always, what is your goal? Why are you buying this property? And how do we make sure that this achieves what you want it to achieve? So real estate was this vehicle that I'd never learned about. And then I got involved with, not really involved, but I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad, everybody, or most people know the name, right? It's Robert Kiyosaki, and he's built an empire based on that name. But it's the tagline for the book that captivated me. And he said, it's what the rich teach their children that the poor and the middle class don't. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, what do I need to understand about wealth? And Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the story of what he calls his poor dad. And his poor dad was the dean at the University of Hawaii.
Right.
He was no slouch, right? But the rich dad taught him a different way of thinking about money, about the future, about security, about finances. And so that's how I got started with it. And then I continued to work with people that wanted to build wealth, and real estate was the vehicle that they were using for building wealth. So I've quite frankly worked with thousands of investors over the years.
And you've also written a wonderful book called Hold.
Yes.
That is very popular in the Keller Williams space because you're very involved with the Keller Williams organization. And, you know, I feel like the more people I meet in that enormous world, so many people know, admire, appreciate, and love you because the leader you are, the coaching you've offered, some of the programs you've built there, and really influence that community as well. And that's what I got to experience the first time I heard you speak. And my original mentors in the life insurance business, they came from a more traditional background before they saw, whole life and infinite banking, which then changed their paradigm. And I would say you probably had a similar experience with Rich Dad Poor Dad. It changed the mindset, which led you down a different path. And by the time I met you and saw what you were talking about financially, I knew it was the truth. From the investing side. That was what I was looking for and I was hungry for in the financial world. And so after I'd heard you speak on how to use real estate, to create passive income, to build net worth, equity, all of these tactics that are, I would say, far superior than what most people are doing with their investing, because it's more intentional. But I also believe that real estate is one of those assets that will absolutely change a life in the middle America demographic. And, one of the things you've always said is success leaves clues. You look at some of the wealthiest people in the world, real estate is one of the assets they all own.
Right.
There's commonality there that we should be looking at and saying, maybe we should own some of that for ourselves.
What do insurance companies own?
Right.
What do the banks own?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
If we go study the best players in the game, let's watch what they're doing and we can just do that for our lives. And, you changed my paradigm around real estate because after I had come to that seminar, then brought many of my clients, I said, you got to listen to this guy talk, because when you get to the investing point, this is the kind of stuff you want to be focusing on. And shortly after that, we went to lunch and we had a series of conversations because I was looking for a real estate relationship to bring my clients into that could help them with the investing part. Because what we teach is very foundational with whole life and infinite banking. It's more of a savings conversation. And I gave you 2 books at a lunch appointment. We were at PF Chang's, which is where we usually go.
Yeah.
And I said, would you read these 2 books? I'm looking for a real estate connection and partnership. And what I loved about you, Steve, is you're always hungry to learn. We talk about the arrival syndrome in the book, Becoming Your Own Banker. That's something you definitely don't have. There's always a curiosity to the way you're living life, which I really admire. And you read those books, I believe, that weekend. And then you had texted me and you said, I used to have one of these policies, but I didn't know you could do some of these things with it.
Right.
And I probably could have saved it to float myself through a real estate crash.
Yeah. In the 1980s and mid 80s.
And so that story we've heard many, many, many times, which is where the whole life comes into as that savings and liquidity protection part. But after we had chatted, you had changed my paradigm around real estate because I was of this mindset that it's going up, and it's about to crash. So what I had been told from other people in my life is wait, because it's going to come down. And after we had went to lunch a few times, you told me it's not coming down, especially not in Arizona. So we actually bought our first home months after that conversation, which was one of the best financial decisions we ever made.
That's good to hear.
It is good to hear.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where you want to be around people who can think for themselves, but are always looking to improve their thinking, change their paradigm.
So it was more than what you just said, because one of the things that I remember you said that we needed to get together and talk about, because you came to me and you said, we're both doing the same thing. You're just doing it in a different environment. And the subject matter that or what you talked about was, and what I was focused on, and you are too, is creating multi-generational wealth. And so how do we create multi-generational wealth? In the Old Testament of the Bible, there's a book called Proverbs. And in Proverbs, there's one of the Proverbs, and for those that don't know and understand the Old Testament, one of the wisest men that ever lived, they considered him to be Solomon. His name was Solomon. And so he wrote all these Proverbs, just giving his wisdom. And what he said was, a good man provides an inheritance for his children's children. And so I contrast that because I have an RV. And so I notice RVs driving down the roads and all of that kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of RVs out there that says, they write it right on the back and they say, we're spending our children's inheritance, right? And so diametrically opposed concepts. And that was one of the things that was important to you and what I was trying to do, because real estate is so tax advantaged and most people don't understand the impact of paying less taxes. Most people, the withholding happens from their paycheck and they just know what the net is. They don't know what the gross is. And they're not focused on not just acquiring more and building wealth, but there's also the advantages of not having to pay as much tax. And because you don't have to pay as much tax, you can build wealth more quickly.
Absolutely.
And so the tax advantages of real estate are huge that way. And then also the tax advantages of being a part of infinite banking, the tax-free growth that happens with that, as well as the transfer to the next generation without having to pay tax. Those are both huge. And real estate provides in a different way, but the tax law actually incentivizes us to do both.
Absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about that journey, Steve, because I felt like you picked up on these concepts rather quickly. Sometimes, like, I'll give you my example.
What concepts?
Infinite banking,
Okay.
whole life. There are a lot of big misconceptions that exist out in the wide world. And, you know, when I first saw this, I knew it was out there. So when I first got a glimpse at it, I knew I was going to do it.
Mhm.
But it took me like 2 or 3 times to hear this orthodontist talk through it before all the connections were made. Then it was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Right.
And I feel like there was a similar transformation there for you too, but you picked up on it so quickly, and you knew right away this could be a valuable connection to what you were doing with real estate.
Right.
So what was in your head as we were building that early relationship between you and I, and what were the keys that connected for you and other people that may or may not be looking at whole life and infinite banking right now? What would you say to people coming after us now that are starting to hear this conversation, because this is a conversation that's growing, especially in the real estate space right now?
Sure. So Kyle, I'm 71 years old, and I have life history and life experience that you would not have had. So somebody could share with you a concept, but you wouldn't have a way to relate it back to an experience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So my experience, as you've already mentioned, in the 1980s, Congress changed the tax laws in 1980s. And what Congress told the American people was that we're going to close the loopholes for the rich. And they called it, in 1986, the Tax Equity Fairness Reform Act. And equity and fairness, everybody wants equity and fairness, right? So that's what they called it. What they wound up doing was bankrupting the savings and loan industry. And the savings and loan industry was where most of the real estate financing was happening. We don't have savings and loans today because it's gone. And so they changed the tax laws, and they changed them retroactively. And what I saw happen when they changed all of that was that the economy there were so many investments in what you would think, shopping malls and golf courses and the Phoenician Hotel and major subdivisions. And they all went down because Congress changed the tax laws. I also saw people, old ladies, that had invested in the savings and loans and put their retirement into the savings and loans. They bought bonds in the savings and loans. Those bonds were yielding 12 and 13% at the time. Well, when the savings and loan goes down, what's the bond worth? Nothing.
Right.
So I experienced that. And because of that, we saw the economy decline. Then we saw the politicians blame the real estate developers for the decline, and they should have known, and all of this. So I don't want to go too far into that, but my experience was I had gone 3 months without selling a property. And so I had investment properties. The values were, in the way that I was investing in those properties was I wasn't worried about having a positive cash flow. I just wanted to own the properties and have the tenant pay down the loan for me, and whatever appreciation came. Well, because I didn't have a positive cash flow, and because I wasn't selling real estate because the economy had gone down, it was like a double whammy.
Right.
So I looked around, and I basically sold off everything and lost everything. The only thing that I had left was that insurance policy that you mentioned. And I called my insurance agent and I said, I need to cash this policy in. And he said to me, I'll buy it from you. And the minute he said, I'll buy it from you, my BS meter went up. Okay. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute. What are you not telling me here? And why are you willing to, and you must be making a profit off of this some way. Anyway, I didn't know and understand then what I understand now. But what I said to him was, no, I don't want to sell it to you. Just cash me out. Get me the cash so I can get going and use that to restart. And by the way, I did get restarted. However, that life experience, if I went back and took a look at it, instead of getting, if I remember correctly, it was like $13,000 or $15,000 worth of cash value that was in the policy, which was certainly helpful at the time. But after you and I met, and I just did a in the head calculation, I think I left $400,000 or $500,000 on the table. And I didn't realize that. And so it's like, oh man, I wish I knew then what you're telling me now, because I wouldn't have cashed that policy out. I would have borrowed against the policy, and I would have kept the policy in force because the cost of the insurance, I was much younger, all of that kind of stuff. So life experience caused the difference in maybe in how quickly I picked it up as opposed to you, because I had a negative experience. And can I share one other thing with you?
Please.
Okay, so my best friend's dad was the #1 New England Life sales agency in the Western United States, and he was in Mesa, Arizona. And again, back in the 80s, there was a company called A.L. Williams, and A.L. Williams had a message out there that said, don't buy whole life. You should buy term and invest the difference. You'll do way better if you buy term and invest the difference. And that's what A.L. Williams did. Mm-hmm. And which you'll find out about me if you don't know, is that I try to understand how things work. And so I was doing all this research when my best friend came to me and he said, Steve, do you want to be an expert in insurance, or do you want to talk to somebody who is? And so he set up an appointment with me to have a conversation with his dad. And his dad asked me a couple of questions. He said, Steve, do you intend to be successful? I said, yeah. He goes, how big do you think your estate will be? And I said, oh, 5 million, 10 million. That's how big I was thinking at the time. And he said, you know who I sell the most whole life insurance to? Is people over 60 that want to protect their estate. And so he said, you can buy term and invest the difference if you want to, but you will thank yourself for owning a whole life policy. And that's the reason why I owned that policy that I had purchased. It was with MetLife. I'm sure it was a good policy, all of that.
Yeah.
But talking to people who know more than you do makes a difference.
It does.
Yeah.
And success leaves clues.
Exactly.
You had an individual who clearly had access to a lot of wealthy individuals. And if a lot of wealthy individuals are doing a certain thing, it might be worth our time to go in there and see what they're doing and why.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, I've always appreciated that about you. And I think it's led to a lot of success that you and I have had teaching some of these conversations together. So we've done a lot of teaching at, brokerages here in Mesa around the concept of increasing our savings rate in a different savings environment, which is the whole life policy. And then coupling that with an investing strategy, which we usually teach as real estate investing. I think it's a very hard strategy to beat when you put a great savings environment with a great investing strategy together. You kind of get the best of both worlds, which has been a very exciting, compelling conversation for a lot of the clients that we're working with that are also interested in that multi-generational idea as well. Mm-hmm. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about that too. So you saw the benefits of whole life and how that coupled your current strategy. It added value to your current strategy of building multi-generational wealth for your family.
Yes, that, and if somebody was really, really smart or really good in school, we would almost disparagingly call him Einstein. Why? Because Albert Einstein was brilliant, and he understood so many things that have changed the world and changed science and all of that. But Albert Einstein said, one of the things that I learned from him was that, what was the eighth wonder of the world? Do you know?
Compound interest. Compound
interest. And the ability to understand compound interest is what most Americans don't. And they don't understand the ability to have something continue to compound and work. And so you know that question, they say, would you rather have $1 million now or a penny a day for 30 days doubled?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And it's, give me the $1 million. And they don't realize the compounding effect. And so that was a big deal as far as understanding infinite banking and using the whole life policy. Because the average person's going to take a look at, and it wasn't until I read Nelson Nash's book that I understood the capitalization time to create a business.
Right.
And so, and most people want it to happen immediately, and they look at the upfront costs of insurance and say, I can't do that. It's too expensive. I'd be better off to put my money wherever else they choose to put the money. But with the capitalization, and then over a period of time with consistent compounding that's averaging 3, 4, 5, 6%, whatever the average is on depending on the rates and the economy, I'm looking at that and I'm going, that's brilliant because they were doing the same thing. There's reverse compounding in having the tenant pay off your mortgage for you.
Right.
Right. And there's also the compounding in having property values go up. And if you're in the Phoenix area, your property values are still going up, even though Case Shiller's out there saying, oh, it's not good. No, Case Shiller uses a 3-month rolling average that's 2 months behind. And if you actually used actual data instead of a 3-month rolling, now that works great from across the country. But if you're just looking at Phoenix, Arizona, property values are up almost 6% this year.
Right.
And so a 6% compounding rate. So those things are like, for me, they're like, okay, of course you would want to do that.
Right.
And I didn't realize the strategy of saving using a policy. And so then because of that, I went to you and I said, and there's also something different because I'd been with insurance agents before that said, Steve, do you have kids? Do you have to go to college? Do you have a wife? Do you have a mortgage? Well, here's the risk you need to insure against, and it's this big, right? And so you need a policy this big. And I was never able to afford to buy the policy that I needed that big. You came and said, what's your savings budget? How much can you afford to put aside for savings? And building this infinite bank, it's my bank. It's my banking business that I'm building, and I'm putting the money in. And you know, I contact Diane regularly and say, how much more money can I put in? Right?
Absolutely.
And so anyway, all the way down the road, I've got policies on all my kids. I have my kids that have policies, my grandkids. I have policies on the grandkids. We're teaching them the financial education so that they can manage the money.
And I would say that your family is already, they've caught in the real estate bug, right? They've seen what you've done.
Been there, done that. They're already down the road.
They're already down the road.
Right.
So now what we've done the last 4 or 5 years is, started that new savings conversation with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you put those two worlds together, we have the multi-generational wealth play from the real estate that can be transferred. And now we've got those policies that are introduced as well. And I think the exciting part for me, at least, is not only do the kids understand it now, but the grandkids.
Yeah.
We go back to what the title of this episode is, I wish I knew then what I know now.
Right.
I think all of us come to that realization at some point. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most common things that we hear on our side, because you talked about the constant compounding nature of the policy. It's the same with the real estate, right? You wrote a book called Hold.
Right. And
one of the things I've always liked that you've said is, don't wait to buy real estate, buy real estate and wait. Mm-hmm. There's this, we've lost the ability to think long-term. Right. I think in our culture, we live in this world of instant gratification. We can hop on Amazon with these phones and order something and have it be there in 4 or 5 hours.
I know, it's dangerous.
It is dangerous. Yeah. And so, we get in this world of like wanting it now. I want the wealth right now. And if you look at, a policy or buying a property more as a business, the business takes time. Right. Let's look at Starbucks, for example. Very successful coffee chain. Mm-hmm. Their business model, the last time I had looked at it, will not produce a profit until year 7. Mm-hmm. So it's like, who would want to own a Starbucks in years 1 through 7? No one.
Right.
Who wants to own it years 8 and on? Every single person.
Right.
But you have to go through that initial phase. It's the same thing with the real estate. How much cash flow will it shoot up on your asset balance sheet as soon as that mortgage is gone?
Yeah, it's a combination of that, because it's the cash flow goes up, the equity goes up,
right,
as they're paying down your mortgage for you. When we teach, we use this really simple example, and we say, let's say you're going to buy a $400,000 house today. And let's say that you're going to hold on to that house for 20 years. And that house never makes $1 in positive cash flow. And it never loses $1. So you never take $1 out of your pocket, but you don't put $1 into your pocket for 20 years. But the tenant pays the loan off during that period of time. And you put up a 20% down payment, they pay off 80%. What's the return on investment? And every time we ask that question, nobody has a clue what the return on investment is. And I say, would you buy a property that 20 years later you would sell for the same price you paid for it? and you never put a dollar in your pocket. You never took a dollar out of your pocket. The property paid for itself over that period of time. What's your return on your investment? And it's 8.4%. Okay. Now we have people rushing to get 5%. Right. They're buying T-bills or they're doing whatever. But that real estate investment that theoretically you would choose not to buy is going to get you 8.4%. Why? Just because somebody else paid off the mortgage for you. That's it. And paid all the expenses. Mm-hmm. Now, if you add the average appreciation back in and we say, oh, it's going to appreciate at 4% over that 20-year period of time. Now your return on investment is 12%. Okay. 50% larger. So 12%, it's only 4% larger. No, it's 50% larger. So that's just the financial education that people don't tend to have. And so anyway, well, here's what happens. If you have the ability to save, then the question is where? Right. And what's the foundation you're going to use for your savings platform is what I call it. And when you first shared it with me, the reason the light bulb went off for me is I'm going, well, that's a phenomenal platform. You have tax-free growth. You have tax-free conversion at the end. You've got a rate of return, and you have the liquidity and the stability because you're not putting it in just any type of insurance policy. You're vetting where are the companies that you can achieve that security, that safety, and that liquidity. So today, I mean, you've helped me put hundreds of thousands of dollars away into my policies. And I just sent in for a $250,000 loan. It's a $250,000 loan. And by the way, we call our policies the Chater Family Bank, right? And so it's got a name. It's a business. It's not insurance policies. It's got a name. It's the Chater Family Bank. And so I met with the Chater family and said, here's a business opportunity that we have the ability to go into. Yeah. And so it makes sense to borrow from the policy, not cash it in, not take the money out, but borrow from the policy. And in the next 2 or 3 months, our expectation is we'll have somewhere between a 20 and a 40% return on investment by investing in this business. So probably... I probably would have saved that money anyway. It would have been saved somewhere else. Right. But the thing is, the $250,000 is still growing.
Still compounding.
That's right.
And that loan that you borrowed against the cash value, Steve, still compounding. Does that show up on any credit report?
No.
Does that inhibit your ability to still borrow conventionally?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No.
And who gets to determine when that loan is paid back?
Well, we do as the owners of the Chater Family Bank. And that determination is the business has to pay down that loan. So just like that real estate example where the tenant's paying down the loan, the business has to pay down this loan for us. Otherwise, we're supporting one business and hurting the other.
Exactly. And Nelson Nash calls this being an honest banker. Now, what I love about this conversation is one, that loan is also unstructured and it's a little over 5% right now.
Right.
We're coming into this uncertain market. To have access to cash in an environment that's completely private, always accessible, with an unstructured loan that now you can go leverage to make the investment, which, you are the patriarch of your family. They're looking to you because you've got the wisdom, the experience, the track record of success. How blessed are your kids and your grandkids now to be watching that happening? Because what you're doing right now, and it's what my family's doing as well, is we're still average American families, right? We're not the Rockefellers by any means, but this is how their families operate. It is a family banking business. I would have loved to be one of your grandchildren watching my grandpa do this, right?
Well, our family conversation is about one thing, and it's called financial freedom. So we were talking about, and so how do we achieve financial freedom? And isn't that what most people are looking for, right? They work a job and they get freedom out of having a retirement, or the savings or the investments or whatever. But that's financial freedom or financial independence. So that's the goal. And so that's what our conversation is about. And specifically, so my sons are in their 40s, and one of them's a firefighter and quite frankly loves going to work every day. And he's going, I want the ability to retire, but I don't want to retire.
He's having fun with what he's doing.
Right. My other
Works with a
son
good
is
group of
going,
guys.
do I want to keep doing this until I'm 65?
Right.
And so this business that we're looking into, because we've got these savings in this, and the savings are continuing to compound. So my wife and I are taken care of while my kids are taken care of because we created the Chater Family Bank.
Yes. It's such a compelling idea. And I think when people first see the idea of creating a family banking business, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of intrigue with what could potentially happen in the future. And the part that I've really loved is I think we're very similar in our ability and drive to create a lasting impact after we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us want that for our families and other families, which is why we've taught the education we've taught for as long as we have. You've been teaching a lot longer than me, and I've been able to learn so much from you. And you get to take those lessons and then transfer it. A lot of times it's not even the wealth that we transfer. That's always a wonderful piece, but the wealth will be squandered and wasted without the proper education and stewardship in place.
Which, as you know, I have a property management company,
Right.
right? And so my strategy for adding value to people that have already invested in real estate, which is to provide education. There's the three-pronged strategy. It's education, then it's the information that they need, because many of them work with real estate agents. My property management company doesn't buy or help anybody buy or sell real estate. The only thing they do is manage properties for real estate investors. So the first thing is education. How do you need to think in order to be an intelligent investor? Information. The real estate agents don't have the accurate information on what properties are actually renting for, what areas, how many properties are renting in a particular area. They might make a decision based on the price rather than how good the investment is. And then finally, it's the services. Yeah, we do property management services. So can I share a quick story? Because our market has shifted now.
Please.
Okay, so our market has shifted, and we are not seeing investors coming into the Phoenix market buying properties right now saying, hey, I want to come in, I want to buy 3 or 4 properties. And the reason is because the cost of the money to buy those properties, the Federal Reserve has pushed it up in order to drop the inflation rate down. So if you're an investor, you're over 8% on your interest rate, and they're not willing to do that. Many of them are not willing to do that. So who is coming in? And I call them investors by default. And this happened back in the 2008 timeframe too, when property values went down. Many people went bankrupt or short-sailed their properties. But there are a whole lot of people that said, I'm not going to go bankrupt. I will not short-sell my property. I'll honor my commitment for the debt. And they held on to them and they rented them. They became investors by default, not by intention. We're moving into a new market now where we're creating investors by default, which means the reason they're holding on to the property is because they don't want to give up the low interest rate and mortgage that they have right now. Instead of going out and getting a 7% mortgage on a property they want to buy, they're like, well, I got to keep this 3% one.
Right. They're not going to let that go.
Right. So they need to be, not all of them, in my mind, what they need to be is they need to be engaged in an education to help them think differently, because they became an investor by default doesn't mean they made an intentional decision to say real estate is the way I'm going to create my wealth. And so they need to know and understand, just like with people with Factum, they need to know and understand the strategy of creating and using their own personal bank.
I think the key word there is intentional, right?
Yeah.
Investing, savings, these cannot be, passive, accidental approaches. One thing I've always loved that you've said is you never drift to a desired location.
Right.
If you want something, and if that's financial independence, there has to be intentionality behind it, meaning you have the education to actually build an investing criteria where you would know, yes, I'm going to take this deal. No, I'm not. As opposed to, like you said, just kind of getting moved into that category of, I guess this is what we're doing.
What do most people do? They put their money into a mutual fund and somebody else makes those decisions for them. That person gets paid to make those decisions. Many times it gets made in a taxable environment. So the decision is made, they make some money, they pay fees on the money. They also then pay taxes on the money. And so then what's the net return on investment? And one of the things that I learned because of our relationship and what we've gone through over the past few years is that essentially the return on investment for a long-term hold in these insurance policies is essentially equal to a mutual fund that averages 8% per year every year.
And that's when we go to net versus gross returns, because
Right.
most people looking at their retirement accounts or the stock market, everything's usually an average rate of return
Right.
with a gross number.
Which is a great way to lie to somebody.
It can be very, very misleading.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for being diplomatic.
We want the actual return, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
Great. I've got a high gross income. That sounds good to a lot of people, but the net income is the only thing that really matters. How
Right.
much are you really bringing home and keeping? So the gross average rates of return can be very misleading. And a lot of times that gets compared to insurance. And this is where people will say whole life has a low rate of return. Well, yes, maybe if you're comparing it to investments, which it's not. And if you're looking at the net returns of an insurance policy versus the gross returns of, let's say, the stock market, you could be easily misled on
Right.
how those things are.
Could you do better in the stock market? The answer is yes. Does the average person do better? I saw a statistic in the Wall Street Journal where they said it was something like 94% of the people who had their money managed did not even match the market returns.
Right.
So on the other side of the coin, the safety, the security, and the liquidity, because I've also been through 2008 where I lost almost 50% of everything I had in the stock market.
Me too.
And it took me years to get back to zero. And so I'm like, I don't want to go through that again. I have a finite lifespan, and to take those hits and then try and build back and take the hit and build back, that could cause ulcers.
It absolutely can. So, I was 19 when the stock market crashed, and I had a Roth IRA since I was 16 that my grandfather set up for me. Wonderful lesson for me to learn early, but I watched 40% of that value disappear. And the advice I was given as a young kid from the advisor who was managing the account that I had no relationship with, he said, "Don't worry, you're young. It'll come back."
Yeah.
And 19-year-old Kyle just said, that is not a strategy.
Mhm.
Like that. What happens if that's me at 64?
Right.
And I lost 40% of $2 million when
You'd be a greeter at Walmart.
I would probably have some ulcers at that time.
Yeah, right.
But this is some of the education information we just get, and we just automatically, it's dangerous to automatically invest. And that's what I was doing back then.
Yeah.
Taking a portion of the money I was working hard and saving and just automatically investing it.
Well, you're assuming somebody knows more than you,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what does Warren Buffett say? Don't invest in something that you don't understand.
Powerful rule to live by.
Right. Which
in
is
the
why we
investing world.
teach. So, and that's why we teach that financial pyramid and said, okay, now you've got all of the baseline covered. Now you've got some extra income, some extra cash. What are you doing with that cash? We call that savings. Where are you putting it? And then now that next part is investing. And so what are you investing in? Where are you going to be intentional about it? And if I could go all the way back to the founding of our country, one of the things that created the success of America was that our founding fathers knew that it wasn't going to be just the king that owns the land. And they gave the ability to the American citizens to own the land. How did they get the people to go west? Remember, it was a call, go west, young man, go west. They gave them the opportunity to get deeded. They could homestead 40-acre parcels. And then they could start their own farm. They could borrow against the value of the land, all of those kind of things. So that's the founding of our country. Now it's become way more complicated about all of that. But I was talking to the guy who, one of the major mortgage guys in Mexico, and we were having a conversation. And at the time, and I don't know if it's changed, it might still be the same. You could borrow money to buy a house if it was brand new. But you can't get a mortgage on a second home or on a used home. So you can buy brand new, and they wanted to incent new construction, but you can't go and buy existing. And there is no mortgages available for that. And he was looking and saying, look at the wealth we could create in the Mexican community if only we could create the opportunity for people to get mortgages Well, we've had that.
Yeah.
And it's continued to get easier and easier. And so that's why I'm so excited about real estate as the investment, because of the opportunity that creates to say, okay, now I got my bank over here and I've got my savings strategy. And now when I have additional money, I can determine whether this real estate investment would be worth it to take money out of the bank and put the money into the real estate investment. Does that move me forward? And if it does, I'll do it. And if it doesn't, I won't do it. But that's education. One. Two, it's information. Are you buying the right property? I've seen so many people buy real estate because they think it's a good investment rather than buying real estate because it's a good investment.
That's why you want to work with a professional, right? Yeah. And that goes for the property management too.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I've always admired that you said is when you start buying real estate, like seriously, most people don't want to create a part-time job as a property manager.
Right. Right.
I think that's very wise advice.
Well, the end of my book, there's 3 sections in my book: how to find the properties, how to buy the properties. Or did I say 3? There's 5 sections. And the last section is called Manage to the Goal. Because the first goal, I bought one property and the goal was to pay for my son's college. When I didn't need that property to pay for my son's college, I did a 1031 exchange into a house and a duplex. And then I did exchange those into a 16,000 square foot office building. So I took $650 worth of rent and turned it into $25,000 worth of rent, managing to the goal of moving forward, understanding that my goals now change. So I'm going to manage differently. And that's what we do with our clients is we help them, number one, determine the goal. And then we partner with them to manage to that goal and understand if it's changed and how to use the equity if they can, all of those kind of things. But it takes education, takes information, and services.
I think we can end with this. That's a powerful principle is, you know, just the principle of getting started, right?
Right.
Your knowledge and understanding of real estate now is substantially different than maybe when you were my age.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And, you know, where you're at with your whole life in the infinite banking concept is tremendously more broad and deep than it was when we first met.
Yep.
And that allows you to play the money game way differently when that understanding is there. You have this property, now you're learning about it, all these different things you can use it for. And I like to, you know, talk about that as in a lot of people have real estate, but they don't use real estate.
Right.
They don't use it to reduce their taxes. They don't use it to upgrade into a different property. There's so many uses for real estate. And it's the same with the policies that we teach and educate on. A lot of people have insurance, but they don't use insurance like you and I are using insurance.
They don't treat it as a business.
They don't. And I think that's one of the most important parts is always wait and get the education before you make a decision. But getting started is where once you get your hands on the real estate or the policies, that's when you really start learning about it.
So I'll give you my specific example because I told you we've put hundreds of thousands of dollars into my policy. That's money I could have put into real estate. Mm-hmm. That's money I could have said, I'm going to buy more. And what I believe is what Robert Kiyosaki teaches, have your business buy your assets.
Yeah.
So why did I put the money in the policy instead of there? Because it's liquid, it's safe, it's secure. I can borrow against it, all of that, right? And it's another business that I own. So my real estate rental business, my property management business, my banking business, they all integrate together. And I made conscious choice to say, I'm not going to buy any houses right now because I'm going to build this other business more quickly, as fast as I can, so that my ramp up period is not 5 years or 7 years, it's 3 years.
Absolutely. So Steve, what would you say to individuals listening to this if they're maybe getting on some of our IBC courses on our website or looking at, you know, buying their first rental property? I've seen lots of testimonials come through from people you've taught and coached where they, you know, I was nervous going into the first one. You know which email I'm talking about.
Yeah,
and
she
now,
just emailed me again.
Yeah,
wants to have coffee.
Now I'm 3 or 4 properties in and the game is getting easier because I understand it. Like, what would you tell individuals, maybe my age, even younger, because the amount of experience you have in life with investing and now infinite banking, what are some words of wisdom you could leave the audience with?
Well, okay. Very first thing is the financial pyramid is so important. I've watched people die at 31 years old and leave their family a mess because they didn't have a will or a trust. I've watched people that had to sacrifice investments that they had because they didn't have the savings to back up emergencies. So it's creating that foundation first. That's critical. Then the next part is, how much can you afford to save? And that's a conversation between you and your spouse. How much can we afford to save, and how fast do we want to build this? So what sacrifices will we make? Not how much do we have extra after we pay for all of our stuff, but what sacrifices are we willing to make in order to build up the power of these policies? And so then from there, then the next part of the conversation is, okay, I got money here. What do I do with the money? What are my options, and what's the strategy? So, and I've said strategy. And strategy just means, what will I say yes to? What will I say no to? And I'm clear on what I'll say yes to and what I'll say no to. And so if you come and bring me a stop tip today, I'm going to say no, right? It could be the best stock tip in the world. I'm going to say no. I'm real clear on what I'm going to say yes to and what I'm going to say no to. So it's build that first, and then intentionally build the cash in the policy to get that policy as efficient as you can get going. And then now what's the strategy to do with what's that strategy for investing? Or how do I use the policy, as you were saying?
I love it. And so, Steve, where can individuals go to get resources on your book, or if they are starting to buy real estate and they need a strong property management partner in that business that's going to keep them protected, help them make the right decisions with the education, where can they go to find you?
So my easiest email is stevechader@kw.com, and it's CHADER. The book is called Hold, and it's Hold: How to Find, Buy, and Rent Properties for Building Wealth. You can get that on Amazon. And so it became a
bright yellow. You can't miss it.
Yeah, that's right. It became a national bestseller. And so we've taught people all over the country the seminar that you attended and how to grow and build wealth. So you can get the book there. As far as property management, a couple things. Number one, you already said it, but I believe you don't buy real estate to get a part-time job in property management. And we get, as professional property managers, we get a lot of people that rented to their brother and they hire us to get them out. Okay. And so you tend to make not good decisions. So get a professional to take care of it for you. And if it doesn't cash flow with the professional in there, you're not buying the property, right?
Easy enough.
So now, if you're not in the Phoenix area and you can't use TCT Property Management, because that's who we are, is Tom, Charlie, Tom, TCT Property Management, there's an organization called NARPM, the National Association of Residential Property Managers, NARPM. And the people that are members of NARPM are the most likely ones to be professional property managers. And so that's a great way to start, to find somebody that's a professional that's focused on it. Many of them, I don't believe the property manager should have a conflict of interest in helping you buy and sell the property, because the big money comes when they help you buy and sell the property. They get a commission. Whereas the name of my book is Hold.
Yeah.
And you don't want any incentive at all for the person that's managing the number one investment that you're likely to have to come to you and tell you why you should sell it.
Right. I love it. And I appreciate you being on here today, Steve. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe so you can see future videos, and also check out our free resources right on our website, factumfinancial.com. You'll even see some of the deep dive lessons that Steve and I have taught together on those courses. So make sure to check out those resources, and we'll see you on the next episode.